My name is Soraya, and you are listening to Wild Roots. Today we will be speaking with Richard Heinberg about the history of humans' reliance on non-renewable energy, as well as focusing on what really matters in a new way of measuring our success as a species, ecological economics, and the importance of connecting to nature. Welcome. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Soraya.
I'm so excited to have you as a guest. I feel like you're a great addition to my podcast, so
Terrific.
thank you.
It's great that you're doing this.
The topic regarding our dependence on unsustainable energy and economy really resonates with me. And I would really like to talk about how that dependence on energy has made us vulnerable and less self-reliant as a species. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the history of humans' relationship with this non-renewable energy and our reliance on that energy?
Sure. Well, my name is Richard Heinberg. I'm a senior fellow for a small nonprofit think tank called Post Carbon Institute. And I've written, over a dozen books and given hundreds of lectures, mostly on the subject of your question, our relationship with energy and particularly non-renewable energy resources. And how we got ourselves into this mess, including climate change and the fragility of our economic system and all the rest. Um, well, basically, energy is everything. We can't do anything at all without energy. And as terrestrial organisms on planet Earth, virtually all of our energy has always come from the sun. And because we are not able to do photosynthesis like plants, we have to get that sunlight energy indirectly, either by eating plants or by cutting firewood and burning it. But over the last couple of centuries, we have gotten access to ancient sunlight that was stored millions of years ago in the form of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. And these energy sources really changed everything about how we live because they're so concentrated, they're so portable, and there's so much energy available. Before, when we were relying on sunlight energy more directly through food crops and firewood, it would take at least three-quarters of the population to do basic energy harvesting activities like farming in order to support the other 20 or 25% who were, aristocrats and traders and artisans and so on living in cities, towns, and villages. But with modern industrial fossil fuel fed agriculture and with long distance supply chains and all the rest, we can have maybe 1% of the population doing full time agriculture, and everybody else gets to do other things: manufacturing, marketing, sales, advertising. And so it's because of fossil fuels that we have had a growing middle class during the last few decades and a growing economy. And we've come to think of these things as natural and inevitable, as being somehow our birthright. But really, they're all attributable to fossil fuels, which, for all of their advantages, have two deal breaking disadvantages, one of which is that they are non-renewable resources. So as we extract and burn them, we remove the possibility that any future generation will be able to take advantage of those same fuels. And the other deal breaker is that burning fossil fuels creates greenhouse gases that change the climate and make not only future human life problematic, but also the lives of millions of other species. So we've gotten ourselves into quite a predicament. And on one hand, it looks great. We have this gangbuster growing economy. We have enormous power over our environment. We can extract other resources at blistering rates using powered chainsaws and trawlers and mining equipment and everything else and manufacture all that stuff into an amazing array of consumer goods. It all looks so great, but it's built on a foundation of non-renewable resource extraction and climate change that the bills are coming due, and it's going to be young people and other species who will pay that bill.
Right, and not only do we rely on unsustainably sourced energy, but what we do with that energy is amazing to me. In these seemingly abundant times, to have what we have in our lives to feel normal, like essentially building a second home for our cars, garages.
Yeah,
I mean, things
right.
like that, things that make us feel up to speed with what's considered normal, is really kind of incredible.
Yep.
So that's what I would really like to discuss, is that, our consumption habits seem to be really distracting us from what's really happening.
Yeah, and the thing about consumerism is that it's really not all that natural. We have to be talked into it. Billions and billions of dollars are spent every year on advertising. Manufacturers use a strategy called planned obsolescence. So they make stuff that will reliably wear out or become, undesirable after a relatively short amount of time, so that we have to buy another one of those things. And all of this, has a history. It started really in the 1920s, when it became apparent that we had developed a problem called overproduction. With cheap fossil fuels, we could make stuff faster and in larger quantities than people were accustomed to wanting or buying stuff. And so we solved that with two big strategies. One, of course, is advertising, which we talked about, and the other is consumer credit, making it easier for people to go
Oh,
into
yeah.
debt to buy stuff they didn't even realize they wanted before. So we've created this whole consumer society and consumer economy, and now it's become so institutionalized that we demand that it constantly grow, because if it doesn't, there won't be enough jobs for everyone, and that would just be the worst thing in the world. And so, even if it's killing us, even if it's killing future generations of humans and other species, well, it has to go on because it has to.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's insane,
Yeah, it's a very short sighted marketing ploy.
right?
It seems like everything out there that's truly marketable or truly profitable is almost exclusively bad for the environment, bad for the planet, or bad for us.
Right. Yeah, no, it's if we're going to get out of this trap, we have to start paying more attention to what really makes us happy and satisfied and feeling, content, which really has very little to do with how many consumer goods we're consuming and all that stuff. It has much more to do with the quality of our relationships with the people around us and with the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
That's been shown again and again in endless psychological studies. So there have been proposals to systematically dial back on this consumer treadmill, using things like gross national happiness as a replacement for GDP.
Yeah,
Right
love
now, we
that.
measure our economic well-being with GDP, which is gross domestic product, which is just basically a measure of how much money is flowing through the economy, which then in turn depends on how much stuff we're buying and all the rest.
So, how do we step away from this economically driven reality? Most couldn't even fathom a reality
Right,
based on these type of principles versus what we have today. How do we step away from this system?
right. So if we pay more attention to what really makes people happy, then we could dial back on GDP, which we need to do in order to deal with climate change and all the rest, and yet actually be better off in the process. And when I was teaching college full time, I used to encourage my young students to fly as little as possible, because, of course, aviation is a big contributor to climate change. But if you're going to fly, take at least one trip in your lifetime to what we call poorer countries or less developed countries, where people live on a fraction of what we do in North America in terms of daily expenditure, and just see what life is like for those people. Because most of us in North America just have no concept of how to get by on less and do so happily. I mean, obviously, we have poor people in America, but they're not happy poor people. And there are reasons for that. We don't know how to be happily poor because we haven't set
Yep.
ourselves up for it. We don't have systems for it. We don't have expectations for it. Whereas people in many other countries do. They not only do they get by on much less, but they actually are measurably happier than we are.
It reminds me of this quote I heard one time, and I don't know who said this, but it goes like this: some people are so poor, all they have is money.
Yeah, that's good. I love that.
So what route do we need to take? I mean, how can we um, curb our system of economics as we know it into a
Hmm.
more environmentally friendly one? I mean, how can we make an economic system that benefits all of us?
Yeah, right. Well, there are a lot of folks who've been giving thought to this for some time, and there's a whole school of economics called ecological economics that has devoted itself to this. And one of the leading lights in ecological economics for decades has been a man named Herman Daly, and he's written about the need to develop. Instead of a growing economy, a steady state economy where we're not drawing down non-renewable resources, and we're not drawing down renewable resources at rates faster than they can naturally regenerate. So those are very simple principles, but there hasn't been that much interest in economics among the sort of mainstream economists so far. And you can see different institutional reasons for that. But the fact is that our economy, as it's now set up, is almost designed for crash. It's we have these experiences like we had back in 2008. Where the economy practically collapsed, and everybody gets really excited for a little while, and then things sort of go back to normal, and the Federal Reserve pumps a bunch of money back into the financial system or whatever it takes, lowers interest rates, and then it chugs on for another 7 or 10 years, and then we have another big blow up. Well, they're going to get worse. I mean, because the economy is fundamentally unsustainable. I mean, the principles by which it operates are fundamentally unsustainable. These crashes are going to get worse until the thing can't pull itself together any longer. Now, this is not, I'm not being a prophet of doom here. This is simply looking at the principles by which our economy is working. And I'm not saying next year we will see economic Armageddon, but it can't keep working this way. So sooner or later, we're going to have to make the transition to ecological economics. Um, and the sooner we do it, the easier the transition will be, and the better off we'll be as a result. So, if you're interested in economic theory, there are folks who've already thought this through.
So, how can our listeners address the opposing viewpoints of those who do not think a change is warranted?
Yeah, that's so difficult because uh, we have cognitive biases, and a lot of times this is especially true these days with social media and so on. We get entrenched in our political viewpoints, and then we sort all the information that comes to us as to whether it supports our viewpoint or contradicts it. And if it contradicts our viewpoint, we disregard it. And if it supports our viewpoint, then we glom onto it. And it just makes it harder and harder to talk to each other. So, if you want to uh, talk successfully with somebody who has opposing views, the first thing you have to do is listen to what their real values are, what their concerns are, and talk to them in a way that takes those things into account. Because if you just start um, with your own point of view, you're never going to get to first base. They will immediately categorize you and write you off, and they think you know what you're. They think they know what you're saying, but in their own mind, all they have is this stereotype that they're battling against, and they'll never listen to you unless you listen first.
Yeah, I think a lot of us that believe this way get caught up in the satisfaction of talking with others that agree with us. I mean, and it's very satisfying, but it somehow feels like it falls short because we're just preaching to the choir.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need to have those connections, and we need to support each other. I mean, those of us who do see these things and understand where where nature's headed and the implications of all this, we need mutual support. But we can't just wall ourselves off. We have to take as many people along with us as we can.
So, Richard, what is one way that you like to connect to nature?
Well, my wife Janet and I have always, had connection with nature as one of our most important values in our lives. And so, even though we live in a little suburban house in California, we selected this place because it had a big backyard, and we turned our backyard into kind of a little permaculture paradise with fruit and nut trees and garden beds, and we have 4 chickens that we live with, and they're very much part of our lives. I mean, we get to see chicken behavior and chicken intelligence and, and the pecking order and all of that sort of thing going on.
Nice.
And so that's one way. Of course, we also like to go out to the Pacific coast and hike and do other things as well. But it's in as where we live in Northern California has been struck by wildfires in the last couple of years. So our connection with nature becomes more precious all the time. It's more problematic all the time because nature is under threat. And we feel that because we're connected to the extent that we're connected with nature, we feel that even more deeply.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's perfect. Thank you. So, here on Wild Roots, I like to be able to inspire my listeners to connect with nature every day. And that's essentially our Wild Roots is to connect with nature on a daily basis. And so, could you share a story about a special connection or experience you have made in nature, whether recent or as a child?
It might take a second to fix on just one.
Well, that's beautiful. That means you have a lot of them. I do
Yeah,
too.
right. I mean, I tend to think of whatever the most recent experience is as being, yeah, yeah. I mean, um, there's so many different ways of connecting with nature and different kinds of experiences, like experience of uh, like an ecosystem where you're just in this complete natural ecosystem where there's no signs of human presence anywhere that you can see,
Mm.
and it's just absolutely awesome. And I remember just lying down on my back in at the edge of a forest. I think it was in the Olympic Peninsula, and looking up and seeing eagles wheeling around in the sky above me, and knowing that there were forests all around and amazing mountains and just incredible scenery, and just letting language go out of my mind. We're constantly using words to encapsulate and translate our feelings and thoughts and experiences, and that's useful, but it kind of limits us. And if we can just let that internal dialogue go and just experience and be in nature for even a couple of minutes, it can be transformative. And I remember feeling that. And it was many years ago, and I think it was a transformative moment.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you would like to add or say to our listeners today?
Yeah, well, it's a an overwhelming uh, time to be alive. Just overwhelming grief, overwhelming opportunity, overwhelming necessity, and I think being in nature is one of the main ways that we can sort of recharge ourselves. Those of us who do see and feel what's going on, we need that recharging, and we need uh, to be there for each other too. And it's so great that you have this podcast where you can help your listeners, experience some of this connection with nature. I think it's great.
Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Sure, it's been a pleasure, Soraya.
Richard Heinberg is the author of 13 books, including The End of Growth, Our Renewable Future, Laying the Path for 100% Clean Energy. He is also the Senior Fellow of the Post-Carbon Institute and is one of our most influential advocates for shifting completely away from our reliance on fossil fuels. Please join us on becoming a more resilient species by stepping away from the usual band-aid solutions and by adopting a true understanding of the complex issues we are facing. Visit education.resilience.org to join us today. As we step away from non-renewables and unviable economics, naturally we step towards our true selves, our wild roots. It is in our wild ways, our wild roots, that remind us of what is truly important. I invite you to reevaluate what truly brings you joy, happiness, and sustainability in your life, and develop and utilize those long-lasting skills, for it is those skills that will reinvent our reality. Thank you.